Now, Antonio Guterres used the 31st of August, which is the International Day for People of African Descent, to celebrate the huge contributions people of African descent make around the world, while also reminding us that the harms of slavery and colonialism have not disappeared. He warned that racism still shows up in unfair economies, social exclusion, and even online, where hate speech spreads and biased algorithms can deepen inequality. Now, this year also kicks off a second 10-year push, that's 2025 to 2034, on the theme Recognition, Justice and Development. Building on progress from 2015 through 2024, when more than 30 countries changed laws and the UN created new forums to address these issues. Now, the goal now is real, concrete change, including work towards a UN declaration that fully protects the rights of people of African descent. Now, joining me on the conversation to speak on this, we have Cyprian Edward-Ekpo. He is Director-General, Institute of Law, Research and Development of United Nations. And we also have Auston Holleman. He's an African advocate. Thank you so much, Auston. I'm told Cyprian will be joining us later. Auston, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, the Secretary-General called the contributions of people of African descent extraordinary, but also warned of the long shadows of slavery and colonialism. In everyday life today, what do these long shadows actually look like? Speak to us.
In the United States in specific, a legacy that slavery left behind could be something such as self-hatred. Especially even in Africa. I really didn't see too much of this until I came to Africa, but things like skin bleaching, white worshiping, those are all two things that I've noticed all around the world. Actually not just slavery, but white supremacy in general, which is slavery is a portion that has that legacy around the world of white worshiping. So I would say the two things are self-hatred, skin bleaching, and white worshiping, feeling like you need a white man for women. Or even men as well. They feel like they need a white partner in order to advance, and even in Latin America to better their race, as they would call it.
All right, well, it's a good thing you've actually had experience, in the US and also in Africa, because the UN highlights economic inequality and a widening digital divide. How does lack of internet access or even digital skills translate into lost opportunities for education, work, and also basic services?
Well, if you don't have access to the internet, you pretty much don't exist in 2025. And you can pretty much be fed whatever anybody else in your immediate area tells you is the right thing and what you could possibly achieve.
All right. Now, the Secretary-General still talked about, in internet access, he said, social media amplifies white supremacy and dehumanizing narratives. And he also said that racial bias can be encoded in algorithms. I don't know, how true is this? How true is this?
Well, can you elaborate on how racism is encoded in algorithms?
I was actually trying to find out from you because it is what he said. But then the Global Digital Compact 2024 said it is touted as progress. So are there specific tools in that compact? I don't know if you've read the compact that will actually curb online hate and algorithmic discrimination in any way.
Well, I guess maybe one way that algorithms could portray online hate is showing certain examples of how one race of people behave. So, for example, I don't know if you've ever seen the Lululemon, the Black American women that were in the store dancing, or maybe Black Americans always fighting or arguing or showing some sort of degeneracy.
A stereotype. Yeah.
Huh?
A stereotype, a particular stereotype.
Yeah. So they will portray those stereotypes. And I don't even know if the algorithm is doing that on purpose, but those are the videos that algorithms, hateful videos or controversial videos spread faster than positive news in the American algorithms. In China, it's the complete opposite. So I could imagine, maybe, I'm not going to say that they're doing that intentionally, but maybe it's just a byproduct of having an algorithm that causes our stereotype to be the forefront. Most I would say most white people, I believe, don't have the perspective of a Barack Obama for a Black American, but they have more of a rapper that is talking about stuff that shouldn't be talked about at all, actually.
All right. Austin, there's actually talk of a UN declaration on the rights of people of African descent, you know, legally and politically. What would a new declaration achieve that the existing human rights instruments, you know, do not?
Can you elaborate on that further?
I was saying that, you know, the UN Declaration on the Rights of People of African Descent, you know, have actually talked about how legally and politically, you know, they would want the African Americans or even the African people of African descent to achieve more than they have not, like more in the present or in the future than, you know, what was achieved in the past. So we would love for you to share with us some of the existing human rights instruments that the African Americans that you would love to see the African Americans achieve in future.
Well, I think that African Americans have pretty much achieved, I don't want to say the maximum because we have not been able to achieve everything, but we've done enough to where it's a question like that doesn't really come off the way I think that it's intending to be. And this is not directed towards you, but I find that hard to believe that the UN actually believes that based off the history of tests that they've done throughout Africa.
All right. Now, let's talk about reparations and accountability, you know, these to actually keep returning to the debate. From a practical perspective, who would be expected to pay, who would qualify to receive reparations, and what model could be feasible and fair for those of African descent?
So obviously, I believe that the people that are owed reparations, I never speak personally about Black Americans being owed, or let's say African descent people being owed reparations, but obviously, coming from my perspective, the United States, if you have a slave, African-American slave in your bloodline, then you'd be owed reparations. Now, who would be the one to pay for that is a question is a question that I don't have the answer to, because I don't believe that it can be done, and I don't think that it should be done because Black Americans are not educated on where to put their money in the right place in the first place. So those reparations would more than likely end up back in the hands of the people that paid them, which I'm assuming most people believe would be white Americans.
All right. Now, I'm being told that our second guest would be joining us in a moment, Cyprian Edward-Ekpo. But then before he does, let me just go ahead and ask you one more question. Which countries or regions, you know, would you say are leading with concrete policy and funding for some of these issues that we've actually talked about? And are there countries that you've realized are resistant when it comes to improving the lives of African descent or Africans in general?
So I would say that North American countries like Canada and the United States are leading in that. And I would say that for the most part, pretty much all of Latin America is the most resistant. And I used to think that the United States I'm not going to say that one is more racist than the other, but the amount of progress that Black Americans have been allowed to make in the United States it far exceeds what it is in Latin America.
All right, so let's bring in Cyprian Edward-Ekpo. Cyprian Edward-Ekpo is the Director General, Institute of Law, Research and Development of the United Nations. Thank you so much, Cyprian, for joining us at this time.
Thank you, Convener.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. So can you speak to us on yesterday, which was International Day for People of African Descent? Speak to us on what it's all about and its significance in general.
Oh, that's fine. The International Day for the People of African Descent celebrated on 31st of August is rooted in the recognition that slavery, colonizations, and systemic racism continue to cast a long shadow for people of African descent. And I think the United Nations is trying to recognize the position that the people of African descent who form among the genre of humanity must be given that regard as part and parcel of humanity without distinction in order to fulfill the provisions of Articles 1 sub 3 and 55 of the UN Charter, which of course aims at promoting human rights and fundamental freedom without distinction as to race, and is central to the purpose of international community peace and development.
All right, so just before you joined, I had asked Auston, on reparations and accountability, and from a practical perspective, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this and who you think should pay, who you think would qualify to receive reparations, and if there's a model that could be feasible and fair to Africans.
I do not see, we have to be very realistic. When we talk about reparation in what terms and in what factor? How do you repay what had happened years ago? I think what we require and the base form of reparation is to make the United Nations laws. We have a lot of laws that address these issues, such as the International Covenant or Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and International Convention on Social and Economic and Social Rights. The problem we have in these laws, and even as applicable to African communities, most of these laws remain soft law and have not been made enforceable or practically applicable. And if you look at the mechanisms of such international law, the United Nations and every other person or institution could draw their strength from those laws and for the purpose of assisting the people of African descent to fulfill their own purpose. And that takes care of what we may call reparation. You cannot actually have reparation in terms of, are you asking the Western world to pay you some money? How are they going to do that? So that can be done in terms of knowledge transfer and strengthening of international law that prevents racial discrimination.
All right. Now let's come back to you, Auston. Now, the UN has also elevated the focus on women and girls of African descent, right? If you were to compare, the U.S., what is obtainable in the U.S. and what you've actually seen in Africa now, what barriers do you think that these women and girls face in health, education, and safety that should shape policy priorities for the decade?
So that's a really good question. I would say health and education wise, the United States for a woman, from what I've seen, obviously I'm not a woman, but I see that they have far more opportunities compared to a world scale, especially in Africa. Safety wise, I find that African women do not have as many resources, or their safety is not really taken serious. For example, here in Kenya, there's a term of femicide, where women are constantly being sexually assaulted, women are being murdered, things that happen everywhere in the world, but it seems to be a lot more magnified here. So I think that the UN moving that portion of the organization here is very well needed for women in Africa.
All right. Now, coming back to you, Cyprian, multilateral commitments, we know often struggle for money. Do you have an idea if the Pact for the Future or other UN mechanisms identified dedicated funding in order to close the digital divide or even to support justice and development programs?
Well, the UN is trying, as I mentioned, that the problem we have with most of the United Nations instrument is that they keep it at the position of soft law, and when the laws are not enforceable or cannot be enforced, it becomes such as if it wasn't or it hasn't been in existence. And another problem I see is the inability of the UN to exert its influence over very powerful countries. And most of the countries that even have veto powers in the United Nations system do away with all forms of human rights violation and cannot be held responsible. So what I think we should do, or the United Nations have to do, is to find a mechanism that cause international instrument to be enforceable and sort of a governance principle of international law, that whether you like it or not, whether you cannot use the principle of sovereignty to violate human rights or to refuse to recognize the position of international instruments. So these are the ways that will help in this kind of situation. And we have a lot of laws in the UN system that are not utilized or being translated into a level of utility. And I think it's a very concerning situation.
All right. Coming back to you, Auston. Auston, we know that civil society and diasporic communities, actually played a larger role in the first decade, that's between 2014 to 2024, in order to push the rights of push for the rights of Black people. So, how should grassroots groups be included in monitoring and shaping action over the next 10 years? That's between from 2025 to 2034.
Well, yes, they may have had a major contribution, but there needs to be a lot more of awareness, which a lot of the diaspora is starting to become more aware that Africa is a livable place and that there are opportunities here and there are hardworking people here who need a living. They don't need you to just buy apartments in Nairobi or South Africa. They need you to bring jobs.
All right. Now let's have your final thoughts, Cyprian, as well.
For me?
No, Cyprian.
Okay. Yeah. The final thought on this issue. I think the term for the second international decade for peoples of African descent, 2025 to 2034, I think I'm correct. The recognitions, which talks about recognition, justice, and development, are linked directly to core human rights provisions. And if you look at Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we declare all people free and equal in dignity and right. And you look at Article 14 of International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which guarantees equality before courts and tribunals. And then you look at the Declaration on the Right to Development of 1986, and Article 2 and 11, I think 11 of the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which guarantee equal to access to education, work, and adequate standard of living. If you make a community effort of bringing the digital dimension of racial justice, which the United Nations is trying to get into the Global Compact, and look at the provisions of this law, what we all need is how to get a mechanism to make these laws very tangible and enforceable and binding in all countries. If we can get that done, move this law from soft law position to enforceable laws position, we will go a long way to solving a problem of racial discrimination, and people of African descent, for example, and other minorities and colonized community will be have some level or considerable level of liberation, because as it stands, the liberation has been on paper, not practically enhanced. That should be my take.
All right. Well, I think with that, we would have to wrap up the conversation. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Cyprian Edward-Ekpo, Director General, Institute for Law, Research and Development of the United Nations, and also Auston Holleman, African Advocate. We appreciate you for your time.
Thank you.